if they had let you make this album or these albums, you could still conceivably be with the band?
It's indeed possible. I mean, it is possible, yeah. But basically, I mean, on a personal level, when they couldn't accept it, I mean, Phil was, literally doing albums and gigs with another band. So I found it totally hypocritical of them to try and restrain me in that way. We had a lot of meetings and discussions and arguments, and basically, you know, the whole thing became so cramped and so tedious for that amount of time that there was only one course that I could follow. I mean, after you've done one album yourself, which you're very pleased with and has sold well, and you know, you created an audience for yourself, there's no way that you're suddenly going to take a step back. As they say in rock and roll, I don't have to take a shit from anybody anymore.
Steve Hackett is a real prog rock man, and you know, a sort of die-hard prog rock man. Certainly at that time he was. So when he left Genesis, what he brought to the table of Genesis, so to speak, is very much experimental, progressive rock type of patterns, musical patterns, guitar playing, acoustic guitar playing, electric guitar playing. That was not the normal guitar playing. You know, he wasn't a sort of Hendrix style player or a Clapton style player or a Jimmy Page style player. He was very much his own man.
He's one of the most free-ranging guitarists that we've ever produced. He could play everything. He could play jazz, he could play hard, he could play folk, he could play with a certain sense of church rhythm. He could do any of that. And what he brought to Genesis was an ability to interpret what the songs needed. And you listen to his finest works, Horizons, for instance, on Foxtrot. You listen to Supper's Ready on Foxtrot. You listen to Firth of Fifth on Selling in the By the Pound. You listen to any of those moments, any of those songs, and what immediately inspires and really hits you is Steve Hackett is one hell of a guitarist. What Hackett also had was a very laid-back approach. He wasn't a confrontationalist, so he was happy to fit in with what was going on. However, later on, he also was very uncomfortable with the fact that what Genesis did was becoming very pretentious and overblown. He preferred the simpler, more straightforward approach, albeit musical complexity was very much part of his own psyche. And in the end, he left the band because he had his own musical vision, which did incorporate being a little bit more straightforward. But in many respects, Genesis owes so much to Steve Hackett, and I don't think they've ever given him the credit he so richly deserves.
I mean, I'm very critical of everything that Genesis has done in the past, but then again, I think that was my role in the band, was to be, was as a, you know, a cross between a professional in-house critic and coach. Basically, I don't like to write in rehearsal rooms. Now, to me, rehearsal rooms are usually too hot, too cold, too dark, too smelly. I'm sitting there, I'm facing three other guys that are at the best colleagues, at worst competitors. Sitting there with knowing that when a group doesn't work, that it's diluting each one of the individual's ideas. When it does work, you know, you have the common denominator, the magic factor. For me, I was getting more out of writing songs at home. I really felt that I was, you know, my real creativity was coming into play when I wasn't surrounded with other individuals or screaming at once?
Well, I think having been through it with Peter 2 years before, when Steve left, it was kind of like, I mean, we always anticipated Steve leaving. I thought he would leave earlier than he did in a way. And it wasn't, for us, a particularly big thing. I mean, in both cases, the members were sort of obviously not too happy with being in the group situation. And so when each time the person left, it was kind of like a freedom, you know, in a way. And particularly when we went down to a three-piece, there's something about being a three-piece that is a very natural thing for us, I think. I think writing, you know, with 5 people all trying to sort of get ideas into the group, people are bound to be, a couple of people are always bound to feel that they were being sort of like, I think Steve felt very much he was always being kind of a little bit kind of, you know, squeezed out all the time, and I think that upset him slightly at times. I mean, you know, which is fair. I mean, to some extent he was occasionally, I suppose, you know, but, and I thought the best things he ever did with Genesis, actually, there were on the album Wind and Wuthering, which was the last album he was with us. But you know, he decided he had to leave, and so that, you know, I mean, it's one of those things, really. I mean, I suppose the people who've left have been the easiest to replace in a funny way, because we had another singer in the group and we had another guitarist in the group. Those, in a sense, they always were. And obviously Peter was the major singer, but Phil always did sing on Genesis albums. And in terms of guitar, well, Mike always did. I mean, he was doing 50% of the guitar anyhow. I mean, he was always doing all the rhythm guitar parts, always. It's a question whether we'd get the hang of lead, you know.
Rutherford, he kind of he took that part on, but he made it more of a background thing, more of a melodic part of a song as opposed to like a standing out lead solo. And I think that it took away a little bit of that sound, but you know, it changed. You know, I'm not saying it was any worse or any better. It just kind of shifted. I think it maybe brought the keyboards even more to a fore, although they always were there.
Lead guitar has never been a very strong feature. We tend to use it more as a sort of sound effect thing. I mean, the guitar is going to be apparent, but it's not there in the kind of way that perhaps it is in some groups that play guitar, and therefore people tend to sort of think it's perhaps not there as much. We use a lot of rhythm guitar, for example, and much less lead guitar. Right. Well, obviously there are guitar solos, and I think Mike's getting better all the time at that.
Steve Hackett went, it took away the more serious progressive element within the band, and it was the start of the transformation of them becoming a little bit more of a commercial band. Not instantly, but it was that commercial attitude that was underlying started to filter down into the mainstream of their music a lot more.
5 people, as we were when we started, developing as sort of personalities, expanding as writers and musicians, need more room, and we could barely contain 5. And now, then we were 4 for a while, and they kind of developed, and you could barely contain that. And now there's 3 of us, and there's a lot more room for each person to breathe and move in, which I think is actually a secret. In a group where everyone writes, it is a problem. 3 is quite a good number.
It just seemed like there was a fresh look on the sound of the band. Although on Trick of the Tail, I mean, which was Steve Hackett and Wind and Wuthering, I think, you know, there was a beautiful fresh sound from the previous albums. But when Steve eventually left after Wind and Wuthering, it just, you know, it was like the end of an era, I think.
In sheer commercial terms, of course, and then there were 3 was probably the biggest kind of quantum leap we ever had between 2 albums. Between that and Wind and Wuthering was probably the biggest difference of all albums. And I think that was obviously the presence of the single "Follow You, Follow Me" on it, which did do something a lot of places.
Stay with me, my love.
the musical hallmarks of Follow You, Follow Me is essentially it's quite a nice sort of English pop song. But what they've got in it that I feel holds the thing together rhythmically and allows them to play slightly different rhythms, reggae and calypso, etc., etc., is the sequencer part that keeps the whole thing going. So they were one of the few bands, Tony Banks in particular, the keyboard player, who was embracing the use of sequencers and machines so they could play along with machines. In this particular case, using the sequencer part ties the whole song together for me.
I like to try and bring things into into my playing that I feel will actually enhance what I'm trying to do anyhow, rather than just buying a piece of technology because it is fantastic.
What it allows you to do is change rhythmically what's going underneath, because that doesn't change. And then on top of it, you've got the song. So it's on sort of 3 different levels. You have the vocal, Phil Collins singing at the top, the sequencer parts from Tony Banks and probably a bit of Mike Rutherford as well. And then the different rhythms that Phil will have introduced, because, you know, Phil was a drummer's drummer, is a drummer's drummer, you know, so he would introduce different rhythmical styles when and where he could to make it more interesting.
It's a song that's driven essentially by Mike Rutherford playing off a delay setting on his guitar, and it's like ding, 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 ding. He's playing off it, he's playing off the back of it, and it's kind of, it's like pinging along. It's an incredibly beautiful song, and it's definitely a ballad. I mean, really the first real love song I believe that they did. I mean, there was many too many off that album, but Follow You, Follow Me, I could only ever describe it as something you would like dance a smooch to almost at the end of a night in a disco. I mean, I don't know how you would describe that. It's not reggae, it's not really a waltz. I don't really know what it is, but it's something you would slow dance to anyway. Very, very beautiful, provocative song.
I mean, if you ask our ardent fans what they think of it, they'll say, oh, it's the group single, you know, it's obviously a commercial single, but I mean, to me, that's one of the hippest things we've ever done, you know. And I mean, the way it was written was because it was out of improvisation, it was a blow, basically. And it just sort of honed itself into this sort of verse, chorus, verse, chorus, chorus, verse, you know. And the attitude behind it was totally, you know, on the level. But I mean, to the punters, I suppose, they sort of see it as their band trying to get a hit single, you know, and we've never really needed that. I mean, in America you need that, but also in America you're more likely to have a hit single with something that's, you know, related to what you do anyway. So.
Follow you with you, follow me all the days and nights that we know will be, I will.
I think what was happening with there were 3 with tracks like Follow You, Follow Me, they actually started to develop a slightly different audience. An audience that wouldn't have listened to Genesis records before.
Their audience of the early 70s were into prog, rock, long hair, caftans, sitting there with joss sticks, smoking joints, had grown up, got married, had kids, had coffee tables. Now Genesis were catering for them. And I think you could understand it to some extent because they wondered how they'd survive in a situation where their old fans were no longer buying records. So they appealed to where their old fans were, and in doing so also brought a lot of other people on board who never wanted to listen to Genesis before, but suddenly heard tracks like Follow You, Follow Me from the Pigeon EP and thought, oh, this is quite pleasant, I might buy one of their records. So that's what And Then There Were 3 represents to me. It was the end of Genesis, the prog rock band, and the beginning of Genesis, the mainstream band.
After more than 10 years, 12 albums, the loss of Steve Hackett and Peter Gabriel, what is it that makes the fans loyal to Genesis? And do those fans have any criticisms to make?
For 18 months I've been sitting at home listening to their records thinking I wonder what they're like. And it's them 200 feet away from me, which is quite something.
Depends whether you like Genesis because of the music or because of the image of Genesis. If you just like the image and you like to look good as a Genesis fan, then you might not like other types of music because you think the image isn't good enough.
It's certainly not an image band. I said, if they were probably one of the most least fashionable bands around at the moment.
What about your mates? I get a lot of slagging off because of Genesis. They're not a Vogue bands alike.
Live audiences are always pretty young, actually, especially at the front, compared to, say, like a record buying audience. It's interesting, yes. I mean, you look at some of the faces in the front few rows and you think, 10 years ago, they were on tricycles virtually. I mean, not that bad, but I mean, yeah, almost, when we were starting off. Yet they know the old stuff, which I always find, I've obviously got into an album recently and then gone back sort of to our old material. It's very encouraging. And there are the elder element, but I reckon there are people who just sort of, I think it happens in rock music, there are people who just grow up and drift off it, they just lose interest.
There's two different things, Genesis now and Genesis then. I mean, in the old days, you used to try to do the same on stage as you did on the album. Be all kind of mysterious and inaccessible. But now it's just more entertainment, Phil Collins with his funny little stories and all this kind of thing.
Possibly Phil Collins realises that Genesis don't really communicate with their audience as a lot of other bands do on stage. So he sort of tries to get everybody involved, being like one of the boys, if you like. I'm just the same as you, and I'm up on this stage, and this is the way you'd behave if you were up here.
After the first 5 or 6 years, they were really original and innovative and all this kind of thing. And nowadays, they seem to be, well, they're losing inspiration.
They're
things
beginning
like this.
to have a recognised style.
They stagnate, yeah.
I think people either love it or hate it. I think that's the feeling I've generally got. I mean, I loved it. I thought it was it was like a fresh new beginning. The songs were, by and large, shorter. It was a different production. It was a very bright production. I guess technology was moving on as well, and it changed. It was a change, a shift in the band's direction, definitely. And I still thought it was a Genesis album, but I actually loved it. Some beautiful songs on there.
I mean, basically, the band is a band of composers, and if a song feels good, 3 minutes long, then we'll leave it at 3 minutes. Because there are some things you just can't stretch out for the sake of it. It just feels right at that length, and so therefore you'll leave it at that length.
I think Deep in the Motherlode it sounds very much like the sound of Then There Were Three. It's a very bright, keyboard-driven, riff-driven song. It's very much storytelling, which they kind of seem to do more and more of. I mean, it is based round a riff, down, 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 and it's maybe a little bit more minimalistic than some of the stuff they've done before. But it's all based around a riff, really, yeah.
Clearly, it's a rock shuffle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, da, 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 and that track is actually quite a hard, tough track. The guitars are mixed a little bit more up.
And you're rolling the days right on into the night at the head of the line. Oh, it's going way out of sight.
I could imagine them saying, well, let's mix up the guitars, and maybe if Steve Hackett had still been in the band, he would have said, no, let's not do it like that, let's make it more interesting. These are quite basic, stripped down rock guitars. And I think they probably, because they didn't have the other members of the band to contradict them musically or say, no, I don't like that, let's try something else, they probably thought, this sounds good, let's leave it, and this is the direction they wanted to go in.
And Then There Were Three. It was like a shift again. It kind of brought it into the songs were essentially shorter. It was more direct, kind of more intense, whereas it was more relaxed and progressive before. I think there was a gradual changeover when Peter Gabriel left and then Steve Hackett left, it kind of merged. It was moving somewhere else, and then There Were Three was like the light switch went, and the style changed in a sense that the songs were shorter. They were more commercial, I guess, in a way, more of a commercial album.
Phil Collins had to step up to the microphone, and was essentially taking the reins of the band, by doing that. And I think it was a new broom sweeps clean, in a sense. If they'd got another singer in, or another musician who was more prog rock, that got somebody else to join the band who was going to sing, they might have stayed a lot more prog rock. But as we later discovered with Phil's solo work, he was quite into Tamla Motown and pop songs. So why not? He's now the other guys weren't saying no, we can't do that. They were obviously encouraging him.
But we did look for another singer.
He did.
And having decided we weren't going to find one, we decided we would definitely try and go with Phil, because he seemed keen on the idea, which was the first thing. We didn't think originally he'd want to. He's very much a drummer, and he still probably thinks himself as a drummer, more than anything. And we just thought that he wouldn't want to not drum, and also whether he could face being out in front there all the time. But I think from the audience point of view, it was much easier for them to accept someone who came from the ranks of the group, if you like, rather than someone who came from outside.
I've let the flaming out so that others could now follow, to be out of the bounds.
When I first joined the band, it was I was kind of viewed as class clown, because I was a kind of scapegoat, which is fine, because drummer's role, which is what I was at the time, the drummer's role is very defined. It's like a goalkeeper. It's like he's there to really present the vibe. You give the band the energy with the playing on the drums and the sort of humorous and the sort of personality vibe, then the band will sort of, bounce off it.
We work on everything that we sort of collectively enjoy, I suppose, and then one or two things will fall by the wayside as you go along. One always has a sneaking feeling that one or two things aren't going to make it, but you sort of you work on them anyhow to see what happens, and sometimes those things do develop into good numbers.
It's a sort of subtle thing, no one necessarily says that much about it. You just have a sort of feeling there's a lot of energy for this bit or that song, there's not so much energy for that song, so that other song sort of gets phased out. And as the album, the time you go in the studio draws near, you find you're sort of whittling it down to roughly album length.
I feel that Once and Then There Were Three had come out, Genesis had completely changed. Still very capable musicians. Actually, that's underrating them, excellent musicians. But a band who seemed comfortable making mainstream mature pop for mainstream mature pop buyers. And by the time Duke came out in 1980, Birth of a New Decade, Genesis were quite happily and comfortably ensconced in this area where the likes of Billy Joel existed. Not knocking them, because they're very talented, these people, but it was a different type of Genesis. It was a Genesis appealing to an audience who had grown up and didn't want the early 70s Genesis, or had never really got into them in the first place.
People basically come to a concert to have a confirmation, and they feel safe with what they're hearing, and they like to hear the songs they know, because then they can sing along with them, And if you give them too much new material, luckily our album's been doing very, very well, so all our fans that are coming to see the gigs know it. You have to sort of think of the set in the same way dare I say that you would titillate a woman. You know, I mean, you have to sort of, you know, you have to reach some kind of climax, hopefully.
At that time, they scaled it down to some theatres. Maybe they were trying to get more of an intimate feel from the concerts, bringing it back to how it began. You know, and by no means were these small shows, but I believe that they did scale it down. Maybe they were sort of reinventing the feeling that they had, you know, when they could see the audience in front of them and get the feeling of the intimacy of what a smaller show gives you as a band.
Yeah, I mean, each gig is basically very different. You know, I mean, you're still dealing with a different set of people, and the people, whatever they give back to you, you know, makes you sort of go 100%. I mean, I find it very hard to do anything less than better than I did the night before, anyway. Just because to me it's like an ongoing thing. You know, I mean, you're just trying to do it a little bit better every night. I mean, we haven't actually got to the situation now yet that we're on automatic pilot on stage.
The album Duke still had some progressive rock type tracks like Duke's Travels and Duke's End. They're at the end of the record, and there's actually a theme that they're using in both those songs that appear from Tony Banks throughout the record, so that sort of ties it together a little bit. But then you have a track like Misunderstanding, the 6/8 track, which to me sounds like an American adult-orientated rock band. I mean, you know, if you hadn't heard Phil's vocals on Then There Were Three, you might think this was a different band altogether at that point.
Now it's not like me to say the right thing. She could have called to let me know.
In a sense, they were very lucky that they didn't alienate their old audience completely and utterly. I'm sure they alienated some of them. A lot of people will have gone and bought Peter Gabriel records or Steve Hackett records, but somehow they managed to keep the essence of their Genesis fan base, and then with these type of new material like Follow You Follow Me and Misunderstanding, you know, which was a single, and they took it to a different place and it worked.
I don't know whether that was because Phil Collins was taking the reins more, or what he was going through in his life at the time. I mean, you definitely get a feel on Duke that he was a troubled man, you know, relationship. It comes across in the songs, and you know, it's a fantastic album. But it definitely, again, it's like definitely on the crossover. You know, it's one song's this and one song's that. It's sort of struggling to find itself, but at the same time, a fantastic piece of art.
It's just such a constant thing with us, you know. It's never been any kind of big changes. I think people perceive it in various ways, the way that it's sort of they've come across the band or not, you know. See, it's really, you know, we never feel we sort of re-emerge or anything, you know. It's just kind of things sort of happen, and we just do a new album, and the people kind of like will decide that we've done something, but we've just done another album.
Right.
I think one of the most important things is that we've always been kind of unaffected by trends and fashions in music, really, and we've always really made the music we want to make, and so consequently we're not subject to those kind of changes that most bands go. I mean, bands come, have hits, go, and so that kind of situation changes. The turnover is quite quick. But with bands, I mean, we were one of the last bands, for instance, to come out of the club, college, university circuit. After that, it was all downhill. That singles started becoming very, very important. Whereas with us, we actually built up the following throughout many, many years.
It is diverse. It has to be. I mean, especially when you've got like Phil Collins, who's coming more to the fore as a writer. You've got Tony Banks, who's always been there, and Mike Rutherford, who's kind of, I guess, finding himself as the lead man on the guitar, but also trying to integrate that as much into the music and try not to overplay as a lead player. You're going to get this change. You know, you're going to get a lot of diversity there, because when you bring something new into something, other things around it react to what's coming in there, and so you kind of get a bit of a mixture. You get different shades, whereas some of the albums before definitely had a colour. I think the Duke album had many colours as it was stretching either way, you know.
The song Turn It On Again, which was a successful single for them, has this sort of weird mixture of, you know, pop song mixed with, has a bar of 5/4 in it. It's got 2 bars of 4 and then a bar of 5/4, which gives you 13 beats if you take them all apart, like 13 crotchets. But what they did was they accented the extra beat, so the ear doesn't think that you're playing an extra beat. It doesn't feel like you're playing an extra beat because it hears an accent. And what's going on there is over the B, you've still got the B root going, you've got an E major to an A major to an E major to a B major to an F sharp major, and then still it goes to a G to an A to a D to an A to a G, all against this. And that's very typical of Genesis. It's a keyboard thing more than a guitar thing. So, you know, if we were doing this live, I'd be playing, and the keyboard playing da 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 against it, and that's, as I said, a very typical Genesis sound, and it's a sort of prog rock thing as well. You know, where you're using these sort of chords. It's a sort of climbing thing. I suppose Rick Wakeman was somebody who used to use it. Yes used to use things like this. King Crimson, Gentle Giant. So it's typical of that style of music, but very much a Tony Banks sound here, really. And one that if I was to say, or if you were to ask me what is a typical Genesis sound, I would have to say this.
the extra beat in there kind of gives it that idea that it's skipping and starting again all the time. It's like it's almost like you come to the end of a line and it's starting again. It's like shocking you into the beginning of the riff each time. It doesn't go straight. It goes straight, then kind of jerks you back, you know. And that's very effective use of it, especially with the way that Phil drums and the way that the song goes. It gives you that sort of da-da-da-da, almost something which provokes the brassy sound on the song. It gives you that the ability to sort of put some stabs in there, you know. Da-da.
I was just another way of passing the day. I get so lonely when she's not there.
We just tended to find we used time signatures more for, and they weren't consciously weird. They just tended to be. It just tended to be how they ended up. You know, we tended to make certain sort of, particularly when we were writing in 7 or something, sound very natural. I think in you know, in some of our early songs like "Dance on a Volcano" or "Back in New York City" and things, where these, you know, you don't even. I don't think most people would think of them being a weird signature at all.
Starts with a tick, tock, tock, tick, you know, the sort of, and it fades in to the drum machine. It starts, you know, as a soundscape, basically, very sort of chilled out, and then, you know, turns into a song about 3 minutes into the song, you know. And that's typical Genesis, sort of concert material, really, you know, as opposed to a single.
I remember seeing them doing that in a concert before I'd actually heard the album. I think they were using that, and it's a very ping-pongy sound. It's kind of really, it's got quite a relaxing frequency. It sort of sets you up for something big to come in there, you know, and it's kind of very hypnotic. It's a very hypnotic sound, and when you introduce the full-on sound of the band, the full-on Genesis sound to that, the contrast is fantastic. I think it really worked as a really empty hall with like a thin scaffolding, just so everything could suddenly be filled up. And it goes, when I think of that album, that sort of that drum machine sequence with the shakers on it as well. It's like really, it's part of it, you know.
We use drum machines a lot, yes. It tends to start off that way because we write a lot of the songs nowadays in order to sort of free Phil up so that he's not sort of stuck behind a kit all the time, and he can sort of like improvise vocals while he's improvising other things, you know, and therefore you get little snatches of melody coming in sometimes. It means that if you start off with a rhythm machine, then, you know, we've got the rhythm going. And always by the end we're so used to the rhythm machine thing, we've kind of written all our parts kind of with it, that it normally still becomes quite a strong feature in the end, obviously. Some songs, though, it disappears, and other songs we prefer not to use it at all. I mean, sometimes you don't want to have that totally tied to a sort of thing.
Tony Banks has said that when they got given drum machines, everything changed for them. And you can sort of see it because they use the drum machines quite musically. They don't just use it. I mean, why have a drum machine when you've got Phil Collins who plays drums in your band? So they use it to create different styles of music, allow them to do something a little bit more, using sequencers and drum machines locked together, and then being able to play more sonically interesting little sort of soundscapes over the top of them, which of course they were known for, but it took it to a different place.
With rhythm machines, I mean, when I use it on my own, I tend to write kind of sort of songs on the thing, you know, rather than just looping single rhythms, you know, which is what we tend to do. I think we tend to find we do a lot of that because of the way we're improvising. You know, obviously you leave one thing set up a long time, and then you get used to having that going all the time, right. Hypnotic quality. But it does tend to, you tend to find you're always in 4/4 for that reason, and you're locked very much into a sort of similar mood, which is fine. But I mean, I do like the, you know, I sometimes feel one needs to consciously make a decision to not do that sometimes, you know, and to try and get away from it a little bit, because, you know, I think since we've been using rhythm machines, which has really started on the album Duke, you know, the kind of weird time signatures tend to have gone out the window.
I think Duke is actually a well-crafted record. I think it's well put together, and you know, I think because they'd already made, then there were 3, and they discovered that they could do it. So when they got to Duke, they had confidence. You know, they hadn't been lambasted by their audience. They all play great, and it's all heartfelt and beautifully produced, bit experimental in places, and quite commercial. So it's not, however, amongst Genesis fans, although it was a #1 record, the most loved record. And it's sort of weird, it sort of sits in a place by itself, although it was very successful.
To be perfectly honest, I overlooked it myself, and I was a huge Genesis fan. I don't know why, whether it was just a part of my life that I was going through and moved on to something else temporarily. I think it is possible that it was overlooked, or didn't get the credit it deserved, because it is, looking back at it, it's one of the finest works, I believe. It's a fantastic album. I love the drama of the guide vocal track, and which is only a short piece, but I just love the melody and the words. The desperation in there is just fantastic. I think it kind of, to me, it's like the glowing heart of the album. Everything else moves around it, and there's some fantastic songs on that album. And also Duke's End, which reprises that, which I've just mentioned. You know, this fantastic instrumental then builds up to this climax, and then he brings them words of the sadness of that comes really back in, and it's really, really dramatic. And I think it's one of the finest moments in Genesis, personally. What they captured there was very, very special, very intense, very emotional, and I bet the take that they did, they couldn't have redone it like that as well, because it's just amazing. I mean, and that's like one song which is in 2 parts that is a massive highlight for me, really. But then again, there's some really desperate love songs about maybe some of the divorces they were going through, or whatever was going on in their life. It certainly speaks volumes on the album. You can sense it.
To my mind, and this may sound like I'm knocking them, but I'm not, Barbra Streisand fans and Neil Diamond fans could relate to Duke far more than fans of Trespass or Nursery Crime could. So they moved in a different direction, taking a lot of their audience with them, but lost some as well, like myself, because I no longer felt comfortable with where they were in the market.
She never thought about the future. She just did what she would. Oh, but she really cared about her music. It all seems so important then. But she did all the time when she performed. When everyone would cry for more.
musically there are some interesting things going on, which are not what you would normally hear instantly on other people's records of the time. So from that point of view, yes, I do like it. I don't think, for me though, it's the album I like the most of theirs. And in fact, in many senses with Genesis, for me, I like bits of different records as opposed to complete records. And in a sense, that's a little bit of the way the band are. You can dip into a record, and like one track like Misunderstanding on Duke is, very much a rock thing. And then Duchess is a soundscape with a song at the end of it. And then Alone Again Tonight, is a real, what you were going to hear from Phil Collins further down the road on his solo stuff.
I think possibly Duke was ahead of its time. It's definitely, when you look back at the history of the band, you can see how important that album was. You can see the power, the emotion of what was going on. The band was changing all the time, from 1975 onwards. It was like shifting, and then there were 3 came on. Suddenly it was more popular in the mainstream, and then it was Duke came as it was an echo of the past and an echo of the future, which was, I'm sure, like ahead of a lot of the stuff that was out at the time. Genesis were they were master craftsmen. I guess they still are. They were writing the book, and a lot of people would follow. So I think it probably is, in retrospect, a more appreciated album than it was at the time, yeah. And for me personally, it is definitely.
They were much more part of the mainstream now. Good luck to them, great, but they were no longer what they were. Genesis, as I knew them, Genesis as the fans in the early days knew them, had been put quietly to bed and left to slumber. There was a new Genesis that had been born with Phil Collins at the front, and they were going in a much more mainstream direction and very comfortably doing it as well.